So, here we go with Iron Man 3. So far, this is the last Iron Man movie to come out, but not the last appearance of the much beloved Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. This movie was released on May 3rd, 2013, and there is much debate about whether this will be the last movie featuring Tony Stark in the lead role, considering the various lingering plot threads this movie leaves for the Iron Man films. Of course, the Incredible Hulk left a lot of dangling plot threads, so we'll just ignore all that for now and talk about the plot of this particular movie, shall we? After the events of the Avengers, Tony Stark is having a few issues since his near death experience. He's created a series of different Iron Man suits out of a strong sense of paranoia about what could happen, the potential for danger, and all that stuff. Of course, this leads to a lot of friction between him and Pepper because he's spending most of his time working on new suits. But that's not the worst thing in his life, because after a bombing connected to the madman the Mandarin injures his friend Happy Hogan, Tony swears to get his revenge by challenging him to a direct confrontation, which the Mandarin accepts by blowing up Tony's house. So, with that said, can Tony get over his traumatic experience, manage to save the day, while also uncovering the real mystery behind the Mandarin as well as the various bombings? Overall, it's an interesting film. Everyone was wondering if they were going to touch on the iconic Demon in a Bottle storyline from the Iron Man comics, which was about Tony's alcoholism. And there is a possibility, and this is possibly the closest that we'll ever get to that storyline, because that alcoholism's a major subject matter, and you don't really touch on that very lightly, especially within the course of a movie meant mostly for a younger audience. You kind of can't really do that with them. And while that overall is something disappointing, I believe that they did a good job at least using trauma as Tony's thing instead of alcoholism, as well as representing the trauma Tony had to have gone through after his near sacrifice in the Avengers. Now, let's talk about the biggest controversy that this film has, the Mandarin. This is actually a very big talking point and very spoilery. Basically, everyone was wondering what they were going to do with this character, considering the Mandarin has very strong roots as a racist caricature. Basically speaking, the Mandarin was created to be an Iron Man villain when Iron Man was first made during the Vietnam War. So, of course, because Vietnam War, the Mandarin was made to be a racist caricature of Asian stereotypes, essentially. He grew out of it over time as he was used in later storylines, but the character is still somewhat rooted in those origins. So this is a very difficult character to put on the big screen, especially considering all that stuff. And you already have the plotline of Tony going through his traumatic roots, and the Mandarin's always connected to terroristic work in some way, shape, or form. You don't want to exactly single out people as being terroristic in their nature. So the Mandarin is a very touchy character to use. But he was a character that you would have to use eventually for the Iron Man storyline, because he's one of Iron Man's most iconic villains. So I won't spoil what they did or how they did it, but I honestly do say they did do a pretty good job here using the character, at least for what they did with them. But they do kind of squelch on it in the Marvel short film, with the Mandarin saying that the dude that used the name of the Mandarin in this film is just a fake using his name, and that's still an ongoing plot thread throughout the Marvel Universe that we may or may not get follow up on in a later film, depending on if we get another Iron Man movie or something along the lines somewhere in the future. And once we're done with all this Infinity Stone business. I do say this is a good movie, and this is an interesting take on the Iron Man mythos. As old as I've seen with all the Iron Man armors just flying in at the very end, at the very climax of the movie, is just pure epicness incarnate. But I will admit there are a few problems. I know a few people who don't personally care that Tony spent most, didn't care for the fact that Tony spent most of the movie outside of his suits at all, and I'm honestly on the favor of that because it shows him as being more of a genius and not needing to rely on his own suit to do pretty much anything. And I know some people who don't like the kid that shows up in the middle of the movie as a precocious little kid. I don't mind him. I don't particularly like him, but I don't mind him. Overall, I do say this movie is well worth its climax, and there's a bit of pathos here about Tony moving on past not only his trauma, but the stuff that happened to him in the first movie, and basically moving on as a character. I mean, he kind of goes a little bit back on that in a later movie, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So yeah, till next film.